So the first thing I want to do today is finish up those last few slides from Monday. And then I want to talk about that insight project that we have on the radar. So the last few slides from Monday, we talked about, of course, the sections of larger chants of the Notre Dame School of Polyphony that are discants. Those are the rhythmic sections, right? Because those are the sections where the independent voices have to line up with each other. Those are the sections where they have to move at the same pace so that we have that continuous symphonia or consonance. So these sections of little discants, there's a fancy word for that, and that is called clausulae. Now, clausulae is plural. The singular is just clausula. So clausulae, plural, singular is clausula. Everyone with me so far? Do we all know what a discant section is?
Yeah.
Fantastic. So the discant sections are also called clausulae, and that just literally means little discants. And these are usually textually related to those other things we talked about called tropes. Remember, tropes were the addition to the original body of Gregorian chant. So we can either extend the chant by adding notes, by adding text, or by adding text and notes. All three types of those additions are called tropes on the original chant. And these discant sections, these clausulae, were often the trope sections. So when you move into these later editions, that's when you move into a discant texture. So these were brief portions of longer monophonic chants. So the original parts of the chant that had been around for a few centuries, that had been around since Charlemagne and the Franks' conquest, those larger chants were monophonic still. But these little sections, these discants, these clausulae that were troped on later are portions of those larger monophonic chants. Now, is everybody with me? Can I get thumbs just to make sure? Good, I see a few. Good, I'm starting to see some more. Good, okay. Is anybody not feeling good? Can I get a raised hand if people aren't feeling good? Okay, I'm not seeing raised hands, so I'm going to take that as a positive sign. Oh, question? Okay, I'm going to take that as a mic malfunction. So we find these chants in what is called the Great Book of Organum, or the Manus Liber Organi. That is the book compiled by the clerics at Notre Dame. This Great Book of Organum, this Manus Liber Organi, was the book of chants that they wrote. Now, eventually, other texts get added to these discant sections. So you no longer have just the original chant text. Composers would get creative by putting different texts in the upper voices. So while the tenor is still singing the original chant, the upper voices are singing other words. So it's what we call polytextual. That means like there's more than one set of words to this particular piece of music. So the duplum and triplum and quadruplum, however many voices they had, would be singing a secondary text. When these sections got big enough, they broke off from the original monophonic chants. We no longer do the monophonic chants anymore. We do what we call motets. These are basically clausulae that have been extended into their own piece. So syllabic texts were added to the upper voices of the clausulae, became separate pieces. Now we no longer call the duplum, we call it the motetus. And that comes from the French mot, meaning word. So this is in Notre Dame, they're speaking French. Mot means word. So we call that voice with its own text a motetus, a texted voice. So duplum out, motetus in, whenever we switch from clausulae to motets. Does everybody understand the difference between a clausula and a motet? Okay. Good. Did you guys eat your Wheaties this morning?
I actually have a quick question.
Yeah, absolutely.
So when we take like quizzes and tests and stuff, is there gonna be like almost like a glossary that we can look at? Just because there's a lot of terms and a lot of them like have similar but not quite the same meanings. You know what I mean?
There won't be a glossary because that's ideally what's happening is you guys are taking notes as I'm speaking and writing down these definitions and then studying them on the daily.
Yeah.
So that there won't be a glossary on the quizzes and tests, but
Not like on the test, but like something that we can study. But I get what you're saying.
yeah, you know what, I do provide study guides. And what I mean by study guides are a list of terms that you should go through your notes and like make sure that you have those in your head. So I'll narrow down the body of knowledge that I'm going to ask you to have active. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sounds good.
Excellent. Yeah. Well before the actual midterm, I will provide a list of terms that you should have like in your head, ready to go on the tip of your tongue. Good. Okay. Does everyone feel good about the difference between clausulae and motets?
Can you, I'm sorry to be redundant, but can you go a little bit more, talk a little bit further about the difference between them, just so I can understand a little bit more?
Absolutely. Never apologize for a question because it's a good one and I'm sure it's on many people's minds. So the clausulae were sections of larger monophonic chants. So like when we talked about the Mass Ordinary, when I have my Kyrie, Gloria, Sanctus, and all those longer chants, those would still all be monophonic. So one melody throughout. But composers in the late Middle Ages started getting creative with that pre-existing body of chant. And rather than simply do the same monophony daily, what they would do is trope it. And that is when they add text, words, or both text and words. So basically all you have to know about a trope is that it's an addition to the original chant. So far, so good?
Yes, thank you so much.
Excellent. So then when these tropes, well, one particular way of troping was called the clausula, and it's those little discant sections where they added upper voices, upper polyphony sections of discant to the original monophonic chant. So we've got the original monophonic chant below in the tenor, the held voice. That tenor is singing the original chant. The upper voices, the duplum, the triplum, the quadruplum, however many, those upper voices are singing newly composed melodies over the tenor. So you've got the original chant and newly composed discant above it. So far, so good there.
Yes, sorry, my phone froze.
You're fine. If there's one thing I understand, it's Wi-Fi problems. Good. Okay, so when those discant sections, those clausulae, get so big, they end up becoming their own pieces. So it's really just a matter of length. The difference between a clausula and a motet is really a matter of length, because clausulae are little sections of a larger monophonic chant. Motets are the exact same texture, but now those pieces have gotten so long, they've broken off from the original monophonic chant. So there's no monophony in a motet. Does that feel good?
Yeah, that makes a lot more sense.
Okay. Is everybody feeling good now? Okay, fantastic. So that's the motet. And just again, in terms of keeping our terminology straight, when we move from clausulae to motets, we change the name of that second voice from duplum to motetus. And motets, again, have another text added to them. So it's not just the chant text anymore. And the upper voices aren't just holding a neutral syllable anymore. The upper voices are singing their own independent text. Now, these motets were meant for very learned listeners. In other words, people who knew how to read music, write music, and study music. Why? Because they will know what the added text is and all the allusions within it. So the added text would usually comment on the original chant text that the tenor sang. So the tenor singing the original chant, and the motetus, the triplum, the quadruplum, they are going to be singing a different text that comments on the original chant text. So for instance, if my original chant has something to do with the Blessed Virgin, then I might have a motet text above it that's like some kind of love song to a fair maiden. And then you're supposed to relate the love song of the fair maiden to devotion to the Blessed Virgin. And so you relate the added text to the original chant text. And you had to be very learned and literate to understand how those texts inform each other. Also, you had to be able to study the score of a motet. There's a lot of numerology and a lot of symbology in these texts, and you had to be a learned person to catch all of those allusions. And that's what medieval music historians do now, is they sit there, they study the scores, and they're like, oh, if we work out the math with these note durations, then that provides some kind of significant numerological relationship to the feast day. And only learned people who study these scores would have caught that. So the motets are for very highly literate listeners. They're not for the average Joe on the street. Another type of genre that develops at about the same time in the Cathedral of Notre Dame is this thing called the conductus. Now, unlike the motet and unlike clausulae, these are completely unrelated to any pre-existing chant. These are entirely newly composed. These are invented out of thin air. These do not bear any relation to the original Gregorian chants. But they do have a Latin text. So they were meant to be sung during the liturgy. You sing them during Mass. And actually they call it a conductus because it would be sung while the book that the clerics are reading from, while that book is carried from one part of the church to another. So as the book is conducted, you're singing this newly composed Latin song. So that's what these conductuses, but that's what they're for. Again, just like there's original music, there's original poetry. The most common subject of the conductus was the Virgin Mary. So most of these songs are dedicated to her. Now, the poems that were newly composed, again, I want to emphasize that these don't exist before Notre Dame. The poems were strophic. that means they had different stanzas. So just like today, we listen to a pop song and we go, oh, verse, 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 verse. That's the way these poems work. So the music could also be strophic to match the poem, or if composers really wanted to stretch themselves, it could be through composed, and the music could have no repetition, no overarching structure. It was just something new for every phrase. Does that make sense? The poems are strophic, but the music could be strophic or through composed. Can I get raised hands or thumbs? Raised hands if you don't understand, thumbs if you do. Fantastic, good. I see several thumbs. I'm going to take that as a positive sign. Now, the music could be either syllabic, so that means that it's, you know, one note per one syllable of text. And it usually was syllabic, and it ended with this elaborate melisma called a coda or coda, tail. Just like we have codas on music today, we had codas on the conductus. And it was a stark contrast from the syllabic text. Think of it, you're going through all, you know, syllable by syllable through the entire chant. But then at the end, you have this very elaborate melisma. So it's a very, I don't want to say jarring, that has a negative connotation, but it was a very attention-getting change. And these conductuses were metrical, according to Franconian notation, those rhythmic modes that we talked about on Monday. So they would be read according to those rhythmic modes that we learned last time. Does anyone have any questions about conductuses, clausulae, or motets? If you do, please ask them, because I don't want to leave you hazy.
Can we go over what like the motetus is? Is that just the text itself without the music?
It's the second voice of a motet. So it's literally the
Okay.
same thing as the duplo. It's just that we call it a motetus now.
Okay, gotcha.
Excellent. Is everyone, seriously, please, if you have questions, ask them, because I cannot see your beautiful shining faces, and I can't really tell if I see a couple of you, and thank you for that. But I can't really tell if there's confusion floating around or if we really feel good about this. Okay, so with that, those were the last few slides from Monday. So I'm going to close that up. And now I want to talk about the Insight project. So I'm going to share that screen. This PDF is going to be on the information page of our Blackboard site, right next to the syllabus. So if you go to where you find the syllabus, you will find this exact same, oh, come on now. This exact same PDF describing what the Insight project is. So this assignment, can everyone see the PDF at this point? Awesome. Okay. So this project, I want to give credit where credit is due. Dr. St. Pierre told me about this project that she did with her students. I loved it. I thought it was a really cool idea. So I kind of took it and adapted it. So the purpose of what we're doing is to get you reading and researching and analyzing without actually having to write the paper. So that's actually cause for celebration, I promise. That you're going to go find a bunch of research and find a bunch of new knowledge, but you don't have to write the essay to accompany it. So the assignment consists of the following tasks. So you're going to actually label your submission like steps 1 through 6. So step 1, my answer. Step 2, my answer. Step 3, my answer, and so on. So let's talk about what each step entails. So step 1, preliminary research. List a topic of inquiry what you plan to research. In other words, a thing that you want to know more about. Step one is pretty simple. It's just what you're interested in. Now, that being said, I'm going to put a parameter on this, and everybody, please, please, please take this under advisement. I would like the Insight project to deal with something we talk about before the midterm. So anything on the syllabus before the midterm is fair game for the Insight project. With me so far? Okay, good, good, good. Okay. Excellent. Thank you, guys. Step two is to write an encyclopedic entry or report on that topic. That sounds way more daunting than it really is. All you're doing is summarizing what we know about that topic. So you're basically saying, hey, I'm interested in this thing. I am going to go look up information about it and summarize that information. Now, here's the difficult part of it. And it's not daunting at all, but it's, some people do not like this part. You don't find the information by Google searching. Google is not your friend right now. Do not Google. What you want to use is Oxford Music Online, available through the library databases. So if you log in to your library account, like Obla Music Library, they will give you access to an encyclopedia, an online encyclopedia. So you can do this in the comfort of your own home. You can wear your fuzzy bunny slippers and your PJs, and you can type into Oxford Music Online whatever topic you want to research. That is going to give you a baseline. Also, you can use your textbooks. You can use an equivalent textbook called the Norton History of Western Music. That's also available at Obla Library. But I want you to use academic reference sources, not Google. Wikipedia, totally off base. Your bibliography should not contain websites, no websites. It should be Oxford Music, it should be academic articles and books. So academic writing. Now, when you write this encyclopedic entry, this summary, I'm going to call it a summary because that sounds way less daunting and more accurate. When you write this summary, imagine it's for high schoolers. If you write this, you should be writing it as if you were talking to some intelligent teenagers. It should only be 300 to 400 words. So that's like literally one page. Literally one page. That's all this summary is. In fact, not even. That's 300 words is maybe half a page of that. So in general, you do not need to have an in-depth bibliography for this part. You should really only be using Oxford and maybe an article or two. But if you do use something other than that, you need to cite it according to the Chicago Manual of Style. If you go to this website, you will find examples and directions for how to cite every possible source. If your citations are not in that source, it's not full credit, okay? And if you don't cite a source, that's plagiarism, and then that's a bigger problem, like to the level of, being criminal. So do we feel good about the summary? Okay.
So if we do use the Oxford Music Online, we don't need to cite those sources?
Correct. You don't
Okay.
need to cite Oxford because it's just a reference. But like, say if you pull in another article, we're going to talk about a site in a little bit called JSTOR. If you pull in an article from there, then yeah, you would have to cite that.
Okay, thank you.
Excellent. Okay, does everyone feel good about step 2? I'm gonna take it as a yes. So let's talk about step 3. Now, here is where the actual research comes in. You're going to create a mini bibliography, and I'm calling it mini because you only need 3 to 4 sources here. Very, very simple. You can do step 3 in like 30 seconds. Well, no, I shouldn't have said that. Now I've just endorsed it. But step 3 is pretty simple. What you're going to do is list 3 to 4 academic sources. Notice I have scholarly writing emphasized. No websites, no blogs, no Wikipedia, no anything with a .com. It's got to be academic. And under each entry, you're going to write a little paragraph about what that source contains and why it's useful. So you're going to actually look at the sources that are most relevant to you, and you're going to determine, oh, I can use this. This is extra, I don't want it. This is poorly written, I don't want that. This doesn't really have to do with my topic, I'm not going to use it. So you need to sift through sources to find 3 to 4 good ones. Where are you going to find these? A magical website called JSTOR. Again, available through ABLA. This is a database much like the Oxford Online, but JSTOR is not an encyclopedia. What it is a website that houses countless academic articles. So you go there, you type in your topic, and it will provide you a beautiful list of countless articles that have to do with what you want to learn about. So then you need to sift through that list and pick out the 3 to 4 that are most useful to you. So again, and this is from Dr. St. Pierre, part or most of what you're graded on here will be your ability to locate, recognize, and synthesize scholarly sources. So in other words, what you're being graded on here is your ability to tell whether someone else's writing will contribute to your topic or not. Can you discern something that will help you from something that won't help you? When you've gathered that information, well, wait, let me ask first, is everyone feeling good about step 3? Okay, good. I'm seeing some thumbs. Good. Okay, many thumbs. Good. Okay. So step 4 is where you actually get to come up with something original. So now that you've synthesized, you've sifted through the available scholarship, you want to come up with something to add to that scholarship. You don't want to restate somebody else's argument. You don't want to summarize. So you've already summarized. That's not step 4. When you get to step 4, it's your time to state your own insight into the topic by briefly and informally answering the question, so what? I've sifted through all this information. How do I make sense of it? So what? Why does anyone need to know about the madrigal or whatever topic I've picked? If I picked Dufay, why does anyone need to know about Dufay? Well, that's my thesis. Okay, note that all insights are, this is an important bit, all insights are not created equally. Quote, because it's a thing that happened, end quote, or even because it helps explain today's music, are not as insightful as because it illuminates an often overlooked history of gender roles, per se. It's not very strong to say, because this thing is interesting. That's not a good so what. There are a lot of interesting things out there that we don't research. What you need for your so what is a practical reason that we should know this thing. We should know this piece of music because it goes against the norms of that time. These, yeah, Maya, these are going to be posted to the information tab right next to the syllabus. So this exact same PDF is going to be on Blackboard next to the syllabus. Feeling good? Yes, no? Yeah, no, it is not there yet because I wanted to talk about it with you first before I just send this out into the world. Okay. So, yes, that's the so what. Does everybody understand step 4 and how to make a good step 4 versus a bad step 4? Please ask questions. Please ask questions if you don't feel confident. Okay, I don't see thumbs, but I don't hear questions. Can I get thumbs if you feel good, raised hands if you don't? Good. I see a lot of thumbs. Okay. And I don't see any raised hands. I'm going back and forth. Okay. So now that step 4, that so what step, is going to lead to a thesis. Recraft your answer to the so what question into a thesis that could frame an analytic paper. In other words, you're going to take the so what and turn it into its own sentence, its own topic sentence of a potential essay. You're not going to write that essay, but I want you to come up with a thesis for a potential essay. So the so what, step 4A, gets turned into its own statement in 4B. Really similar. 4B lists the object of analysis as the subject of a sentence. In other words, I should know what you're writing about right off the bat. That should be the first thing that catches my eye. It uses an active verb. In other words, the subject does something. An active verb is something like, she bought apples. We know the subject, she, and she is doing something active, bought. If I turned that into a passive verb, it would be the apples were bought by her. That's a much weaker sentence and a much wordier sentence without needing to be. She bought apples is easily comprehensible, short, quick, to the point, strong. The apples were bought by her, confusing, wordy, don't need it, doesn't make sense. And most importantly, it doesn't put emphasis on the actor. It puts emphasis on the object. The apples were bought. I don't care about the object. I care about the subject. Does that make sense to everybody what a passive versus active verb is? Good. Okay. So we want to use an active verb. We want the subject to be our main topic. Then state your analytic claim or insight to finish the sentence. That's what you get from 4A. That insight that you synthesized in 4A, that becomes your big claim in 4B. So for example, Italian madrigals, my subject, illuminate, an active verb, an often overlooked history of gender roles. So, hey, oh, this is telling me that madrigals tell us something about this thing we tend not to talk about. That's a strong thesis. Subject, active verb, original insight. Everybody with me? Okay, excellent. Oh, question in the chat. Oh, good. Yes. Okay. I like yeses. And this is finally a tip. This isn't the sole metric by which theses are judged, but it helps to make it stronger if you use precise keywords. In other words, don't beat around the bush. Don't use filler words. State exactly what you mean. So don't, yeah, that's it. State exactly what you mean. Don't use filler. Does everyone feel good about step 4B? Thumbs or raised hands, depending on whether you feel good or not good. Awesome. Fantastic. Okay. Home stretch, guys. We're in the home stretch. List 3 answers to the question, how do you know? Describing your thesis. In other words, provide 3 pieces of evidence for the big claim you made in 4B. So if 4B is your thesis, if 4B is the big statement, the big original insight you want to make, step 5 is just going to be you listing 3 pieces of evidence. Now, be specific in your evidence. Just like we said, because something is interesting is not a good thesis. Bad pieces of evidence are the same way. Bad pieces of evidence are vague. Bad pieces of evidence don't provide detail. Bad pieces of evidence don't cite scholars. Cite scholars in your evidence. Make sure you're drawing on the research you did. The research you did has to have a point, and this is the point. So provide details in your evidence. Does everyone feel good about step 5? Can I get thumbs or hands, depending on how you feel? Good, good. Okay, thumbs. So the last step, and quite frankly, the easy part. Now this is cake. If you've done 1 through 5, step 6 is cake. You're just going to write the introductory paragraph. So you're going to state your thesis. You're going to state those pieces of evidence that you put in step 5. And then you're going to give a few more details. So this is really just you combining the work you did in the previous steps to make an introductory paragraph, plus add a few more details. And Dr. St. Pierre has given you a nice, beautiful example of an introductory paragraph there. You might want to throw in a quote or 2 because quotes are evidence. You should definitely cite a scholar or 2. You should definitely provide an example or 2. So citations, scholars, examples. You want all those in the details of your introductory paragraph. Does that feel good? Thumbs or hands, either way. Okay, seeing some thumbs, good. So this is due October 4th, and I'm going to hand out, well, I'm going to post on Blackboard. I'm going to post a rubric by which I will grade the submissions. But that doesn't mean I'm done answering questions. If you have any question at all over the next month and 3 days, you have 1 month and 3 days to do 6 steps. I am very, very happy to answer any questions at any point. Do we feel good? I'll take it as a yes. Okay, so that's the Insight project, everybody. Let's go on to today's material, okay? Finally, we get to talk about music again, the reason we're all here. Okay, So we're dealing with the Ars Nova now. We talked about the late Middle Ages last time, and things move apace. Now we are moving into the beginning of the Renaissance. Well, we're at this like cusp right now between the end of the Middle Ages and the beginning of the Renaissance. We're at this very fascinating cusp of time. So last time we talked about the Franconian notation, those rhythmic modes. We talked about how they are used to form different kinds of polyphony, namely organum and descant. And now we've talked about the genres that grew out of those. So there we go. Once the rhythmic modes became standard, what happens is composers shifted from using individual rhythms to conceive an ideal number of pulses to fit into each grouping. Remember the difference between rhythm and meter. Once those rhythmic modes became standard, composers started favoring meter over rhythm. So the governing feature, the governing principle of time in music becomes meter. So they started organizing note durations according to meter. So in other words, if I want 3 pulses grouped together, then I need to organize my rhythms accordingly. And for the reasons we discussed before, composers preferred groups of 3 at each level. But what happens is composers kept adding smaller and smaller levels of rhythm, breaking down each new note into subdivisions, either of 2 or 3. So they start out, and remember we said the note head is how we know what type of duration it is. So the notes start out with a maxima, then we have a long, then we have a short, then we have a semi-breve, so half of a short. Then we have a minim. So can we see what keeps happening is they have one type of note and the composers say, oh, not enough. I want to break that up further. So we go from having just longs and shorts to having maxima, long, short, semi-breve, minim. Does that make sense to everybody, how we get new levels of notes? Okay. But now because of all these smaller and smaller subdivisions, performers had to keep slowing the notes down to sing all of them in time. So if I wanted to sing my minims in time, I had to make the maxima really long. If I wanted to get all the minims in, then my maxim had to be like, or my maxima had to be like, whoo. So we can see how this creates a problem for the people actually performing this music. Now, ultimately, we can subdivide time values at 4 levels. The maximotus is the division of maxima into longs. No real modern equivalent exists for that. Maybe we could think of it as like the 8-bar period, roughly, but there were no such thing as bars, so that really didn't make a modern transfer. The next level of time is the modus, which is subdividing longs into breves. Again, no real modern equivalent. Maybe the closest thing would be a 4-bar phrase. So a 4-bar phrase could be the modus. Now, the next 2 levels of time do have modern equivalents. There's the tempus or tempo, and we talked about this last week, the subdivision of breves into semi-breves. That's the equivalent of the modern measure. So when I look at the measure of something, or when I look at the time of something, that tells me how many beats in a measure. Tempus is the number of beats in a measure. Time equals measure. Then we've got prolatio or prolation. So the division of semi-breves into minims. That would be the equivalent of the modern beat. So does everyone understand the difference between tempus and prolatio, time and prolation? If you don't, please ask questions. Okay, so a chart. Oh, this is what yes, okay, there's my chart. So each of these levels, like I said, can be subdivided into 2, which was good, or 3, which was the most desirable. So let's look at the way these transfer into modern time signatures. If I have perfect time, then that means my time is subdivided into 3. So I have 3 beats in a measure. If I have major prolation, that means my beat is subdivided into 3. So I have triplets. So if I have 3 beats in a measure, and each of those beats has 3 subdivisions, or each of those beats is a triplet, then that's the equivalent of like modern 9/8. So I have 9 notes per measure and the 8th note gets the beat. That's the way we would write this exact same phenomenon. Does everybody understand how that works? Okay, do we understand why perfect time major prolation is the equivalent of modern 9/8? Was everyone like with me on how I converted that? Good. Yes, fantastic. Thank you all. You're getting the habit of thumbs. I love it. Keep that up. Likewise, if I have 3 beats in a measure, but subdivide each beat into 2, then that would be like modern 3/4, right? If I have tempus imperfectum, that means I have 2 beats in a measure. But if I have major prolation, that means I'm subdividing each of those beats into triplets. So 2 beats divided into triplets would be like modern 6/8. Tempus imperfectum, so 2 beats per measure, minor prolation, dividing each beat into 2. That gives me modern 2/4. So these time and prolation are the 2 levels I care about you knowing. Maximodus and modus, not so much. It's good if you know that they're a thing, but you don't really have to worry about them. Time and prolation are the 2 levels that we are concerned about as modern musicians. Does everyone feel good about that? Good. Okay. Now that we've got such a command on rhythm, we can look at this phenomenon that emerges in the 14th century called isorhythmic motets. Now, isorhythmic motets are the logical extension of the rhythmic ordines, or orders, modes. This is the natural outgrowth of those 6 rhythmic modes that defined Notre Dame polyphony. And the idea, why are they the natural outgrowth? It's because the idea of an isorhythmic motet is to repeat a rhythmic pattern over and over and over. So the way these things work is that the tenor line containing the pre-existing chant, remember in a motet, the tenor is the slow part bearing the pre-existing chant. That is organized according to a repeating rhythmic pattern that just recurs and keeps repeating over and over and over again until the end of the motet. Also, here's what isorhythmic motet composers add to that. It's not just a repeating rhythmic pattern. There is also a repeating melodic or pitch pattern that keeps going throughout. The rhythmic pattern is called the talia, or plural taliae. The melodic pattern is called the color, and the plural of that is colores. Does everyone understand what a talia and what a color is? Can I get thumbs or hands?
So is this comparable to like a motif? Like, is
I
that
would
what
say,
we're getting at?
yeah, it's more at the level of a whole theme, in fact, because it's motifs I generally think of as just a few notes. These could be very extended patterns. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Excellent. Also, when we think of themes, we tend to think of like transformation, right? Like if I'm listening to Wagner, then I'm looking at, Wotan's spear appearing in one instance, and then, oh no, he sets it in a different key now. These colores were repeated without, they weren't transformed. They just repeated over and over. Everyone feel good about that? Okay, now here's the tricky part. The Talia and the color do not usually, sometimes they can, but they do not usually match up. So my rhythmic pattern lasts a different length of time than my pitch pattern. So they overlap. That's kind of hard for us to conceive because we just generally don't think that way, but they were much more concerned with numbers than we are. So the Talia and the color do not have to last the same length of time, and in fact, they usually don't. The Talia could be manipulated by diminishing or augmenting the rhythms, so I can slice my rhythms in half or double them. And the colores could be manipulated by using them backwards in retrograde, much like we do with 12-tone composition in the early 20th century. Does that make sense? How we can manipulate each of these patterns? Okay, I'm gonna say yes, because I don't hear questions and I don't see hands. Now, isorhythm was mostly a technique that was used in motets, and that's what we're focusing on, isorhythmic motets. But also be aware that this could happen in masses too, right? Like the composers could use the same technique in their masses. So let's look at these in practice. Oh no, I'm sorry, one more thing. Remember that the motet is a learned genre, right? So this is one of those types of things that takes score study, because you have to look at the score to figure out when the patterns are repeating. And isorhythm at first usually only, well, at first it did only happen in the tenor line. So only the tenor line had these repeating patterns. But in the second half of the 14th century, some composers did this thing called pan-isorhythm, where all of the voices in the motet are organized according to Talia and colores. So one example of an isorhythmic motet that I asked you to check out for today, come on. There we go. Okay, is this thing by Philippe de Vitry. He was a French priest and musician, so he's writing liturgical music. And what's cool about him is he doesn't just stay in one spot. He likely worked and studied at Notre Dame in Paris, but he also held posts in Cambrai and Avignon. That's a city, Avignon is a city that was very important in the time of de Vitry because it hosted the papacy. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second. But the thing that I want you to remember about de Vitry is he served some of the most powerful dukes and princes in France, and that gave his art a great deal of political and social influence. In fact, his music was used to support the Crusades and other expeditions in the Holy Land. His satires, so he's ribbing the people in power. His satires are incorporated into the Roman de Fauvel with other prominent artists. We'll talk more about the Roman de Fauvel at a later point. So even though musicians are still working in the status of servant, Philippe de Vitry is powerful may not be the right word, but he's an influential figure. As a scholar, he set many of his own texts and established his musical reputation by writing a theory treatise. And in fact, de Vitry we know as one of the writers who defined ars nova. So that term that we encountered at the beginning of class, de Vitry was the writer who codified that term. So the piece of Divitri's that we're looking at is an isorhythmic motet. Notice it has 3 titles. Why would a motet have 3 titles based on what we talked about at the beginning of class?
Because they were set to like different texts, right?
100%. It's got 3 titles because there are 3 different texts. So notice one of the titles, this merito, this at the end, that's all in caps. That tells us, oh, that's the tenor voice. So here's the chant that it came from, this merito. And then he lays 2 voices over it, quoniam and tribum. So perfect, thank you. Absolutely fantastic, Autumn. It's got 3 titles because it incorporates 3 separate texts. Now, this is from the Roman de Fauvel. I promised we'd talk about it. The Roman de Fauvel is a satire. It's an entire epic poem making fun of this one particular powerful dissolute, a real Don Giovanni type, but in the Middle Ages. And because other people couldn't speak out freely about him, we had to use art to do it. So this epic poem takes jabs at this really powerful nobleman that nobody liked. And this particular motet talks about him in a very illuminating way. So you'll notice he's talking about animals in this. There's the fox, that's Marigny, that's the guy, the noble that nobody liked. He's a fox because he's completely unscrupulous. Then there's the rooster. And what's really cool about the rooster is the Latin word for rooster is gallus. What is France in Latin? Gallus. So the motet is talking about how the fox is a jerk to the rooster. And he's basically saying Marigny is a jerk to France. Now the lion is the king who can, he's the only one who can exert any power over this Marigny guy. So the upper voices tell the story of Marigny hurting the Gallus, and Philip the lion has to come in and keep them all in order. The tenor line beneath that story sings, "We suffer this deservedly," which is a really fun comment on like, yep, we totally, this jerk is, we've created our own monster by giving him all this power and all this influence. We deserve what we get for making Marigny a noble. So these textual associations feed into each other. Remember at the beginning of class, I said the upper voices comment on the original chant and back and forth too. So in this case, the chant comments on the story that is told in the song. So the relation between the 3 different texts, or the relation among the 3 different texts, is the key to understanding this motet. Now, the motet is unusual for a couple different reasons. First, because the upper voices are in Latin. Usually, the upper voices of a motet would have been in vernacular language, in this case, French. So usually you'd have a Latin chant beneath in the tenor, and the upper voices would sing something in French. But Divitri uses Latin poems for his upper texts, and that gives it a sort of a gravitas, a sort of official quality that we wouldn't get if it were just vernacular language. It's also unusual because this is a political satire. Isorhythmic motets were usually celebratory. You usually used isorhythmic motets to like mark a very happy occasion. And in this case, it's the complete opposite. It's saying like, look at this jerk. Oh, we deserve it. The way it starts off is with an introitus, and that's usual. The vast majority of isorhythmic motets start off with a section called an introitus. And what this is a section that the upper voices sing alone without the tenor. So there's no tenor yet. It starts off with the triplum, Then the motetus comes in. Remember, the motetus is the new word for duplum once motets break off from the other chants. So the triplum and motetus, the two top voices, start us off in the introitus, and then the tenor comes in. Does everyone understand what an introitus is? Can I get thumbs or hands? Good. I see a few thumbs. I'd like to see some more thumbs. So basically, an introitus is just the first section of the motet. And in modern terms, it only lasts a few measures. So it's not a very long section. It's not even a full phrase. Yeah, exactly, Andres. And the important thing that separates the intro from the motet, the rest of the motet, is that there's no tenor in the introitus. It's just the upper voices. Okay. Does everyone feel good about an introitus now? Thumbs or hands? Okay. I can't tell if I'm confusing people or if people have just walked away from the computers. Let's go ahead. I think we get it. Okay. So the introitus starts us off. Then what I want you to look for in your scores, I'd like you to look for your scores as we listen to this. And I want you to look at when we see the taille and colores repeat. Each will be marked by a number in your score. When you see a Latin or a Roman numeral in your score, that means you started a new taille. When you see an Arabic numeral in your score, like the ones we're used to writing 1, 2, 3, 4, when you see those numerals, we've started a new color. So let's listen to the motet, and I want you to follow along with your scores and check out when we start new taille and new colores. Okay, that's a nice strong cadence. So, did the taille and colores always line up with the musical cadences? No, exactly. They bear no bearing on the actual structure of the motet. And that's why It was learned people who had to study the score to discern where these things are. They're not immediately audible. That's why you need to look at the score to figure out when they begin and end. Because you wouldn't just pick this up from hearing it. That being said, how does this motet feel different from the music we've listened to before?
It kind of seems like there are smaller subdivisions that they use.
Yeah, I was gonna say it seems more like fit into a meter or time signature almost.
Precisely. So to relate both of your comments together, that note inflation that we talked about, we're working with smaller chunks, and those smaller chunks are fitting into the meter, the mensuration. And yeah, as Maya points out, okay, here's another thing. It feels fugal because we have what we call points of imitation. And what that means is these little motives that get passed around and repeated or imitated among the voices. Sorry, guys. Yeah, that's a great observation, Maya. And it feels fugal. Wait until we get to music of the Renaissance, because then we'll encounter this thing called pervasive imitation, which is exactly what you think it is. It's when all the voices do is imitate each other over and over and over. Cool. What else? Does anything else feel different about this? What feels similar to the previous music we've heard?
It was all men singing.
Yeah. Now we can perform it with, because these weren't motets when they broke away, were not necessarily part of the liturgy, and especially this one included in the Roman de Fauvel was meant to be performed in-house. So like, you just with your buddies. Yeah. And it did definitely countertenor power, but this was all men. And so it has that timbral connection, right? Allie, yeah, tenor drone. And what we hear is that original chant, that merito, those long notes are being held underneath the discant on top. Fantastic. How about the types of intervals you hear? What were the consonances in this piece?
Mostly fifths and fourths.
Exactly. Fourths, fifths, and octaves are my symphoniae, my consonances. So we're still not working with do, mi, sol as the root of all the functional harmony. We're still working with very open, perfect consonances. Excellent. Anything else to say about this before we go ahead? Okay, let's keep talking. So in the late Trouvère songs, we're going to move into the secular world now. Late Trouvère songs show us a breaking down of courtly love. And I've included a little quote from the biography of Geoffrey Rudel, so that you can see, like, okay, in the 12th century, so about 200 years before the time we're talking about, this is courtly love. This is what fin amour is. In the 14th century, this stereotype breaks down. We no longer subscribe to courtly love. So what we want to remember about these late Trouvère songs is that these are still being passed down orally. So it's the spread of an oral tradition. And so we do see some variation among manuscript sources and disagreement about what the real melody is. Along those lines, leave behind your notions of intellectual property. So there is no one composer who is responsible for a particular melody, right? We get to share those things because once they're out in the world, they're out in the world for all to use. Also, similarly, there's no text. There's no one true ideal version of a song that's the standard we all have to reach for each time. Now, in contrast to the motets, which started out with a tenor, Trouvère songs, especially in the later period that we're looking at in the 14th century, Trouvère songs started with a melody and then added the polyphonic lines beneath it. So with my motet, I'm starting out with a tenor on the bottom and building up. With Trouvère songs, it goes the exact opposite way. I start out with a melody and then write accompaniment below. Does everyone understand that distinction? Can I get thumbs or hands? Awesome. Okay. And of course, the later Trouvère songs are all using the forms fixe. The example that I asked you to listen to for today was Machaut's Rosalise. And oh crap, I didn't fill out the year. Whoops. I'll fix that. I'll put that in the PowerPoint. Okay. I know it is 10:45, so we will pick up with Rosalise next Monday, I promise. Does anybody have any questions before we go for the day? Okay, thank y'all. Y'all are rock stars. I will see you. Have a lovely weekend. And
Thank you.
thank you.
I have a quick question.
Yes, absolutely.
Can you guys repeat 6 of the project you're supposed to do?
I'm sorry, Jared. Could you say that just a little louder?
Can you repeat the number 6 of the project you're supposed to do?
All 6 of them?
No, just the 6th one.
Just the 6. Okay.
That's what said my Wi-Fi was kind of cutting me out of Zoom. So
I can sympathize. Luckily, this new router seems to be helping, but yeah. Good. Okay, so step 6 is where you put that all together. What you're going to do in step 6 is write an introductory paragraph using the details that you crafted in the earlier steps. So the thesis that you came up with in 4B, that becomes your topic sentence. The evidence that you supplied in step 5, those become, the body of your paragraph. And then what you do, oh, go ahead, sorry.
no, I was just saying okay.
Then what you do is you just fill in some more detail around each of those pieces of evidence. I get so dry, I'm sorry. So you have those 3 pieces of evidence in your body of the paragraph, and you're just going to fill out, okay, well, this professor says XYZ. That article said this thing. If I look at the score, then this piece of evidence emerges. So you're just filling in detail and then crafting an intro paragraph to the theoretical essay.
Okay.
Feel good?
Yeah.
Okay, excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you. Glad to help. Okay. Oh, hey, Jake, no worries. How can I help you, my friend?
Oh, no, I was just letting you know that I didn't leave on my own terms. It kind of kicked me out. So I was just joining back in just to say, yeah, computer died. So
Thank you for letting me know. I've been kicked out of my own classes on multiple occasions, so no worries.
all right.
Thank you, sir.
No problem.